Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Gershuni. I'm the Executive Director for the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program, and I'm the co-director of Aspen Ideas Climate, our big public event like this that takes place in Miami Beach each year in March. Last year, at long last, the U.S. Congress took action on climate change by passing the Inflation Reduction Act. It may be the single best chance we have in the U.S. to decarbonize quickly, but passing a bill is only the first step. Implementing well is not a given, and so President Biden selected someone who knows how to get things done in Washington. Please welcome Senior Advisor to the President for the Inflation Reduction Act implementation, John Podesta, and Telemundo news anchor and Director of the Telemundo Environmental Unit, Vanessa Hawk.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Vanessa Hawk, and I'm just delighted to be here with all of you in beautiful Aspen. This place is just spectacular. And I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with Mr. John Podesta. Welcome, John.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, and in such a lovely place, too.
Absolutely. John, you have a very, very important job in a critical time for our country. So we are committed to cutting emissions by 50% in 2030 and basically going net zero by 2050. So this is a very, very, very big undertaking. And the Inflation Reduction Act is a way to begin this. I would like to start by asking you, what will be the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act in our climate goals?
Well, first of all, this is the biggest investment in clean energy, not just in the history of the United States, but in the history of the world. And It's a tremendous achievement. It's at the heart of an economic strategy. I was just listening to Steve Ratner in the other tent. It's at the heart of an economic strategy that's all about investment, putting people to work to do the work that needs to get done. And it covers the full range of emitting sectors. That's unusual. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just go after power, it goes after transportation, industrial processes, agriculture and forestry, and buildings, the big sources of emission, with support for the private sector to make the kind of investments that the United States needs to do to take the lead again in climate action, and to really do something else for the world, which is to drive down the price of these clean energy technologies, to set off a cycle of innovation. So we're very excited about what's already occurred, the response from the private sector, the announcement that are virtually daily about new manufacturing, new deployment across a whole range of technologies. But as Greg, who I've worked with over the years, said at the beginning, it's one thing to pass it, it's another thing to implement it, and so we're hard at work trying to get that done.
Yes, I bet, definitely. So it's been almost a year since the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law. Could you share with us some specific samples of successes, of cases where the IRA is actually lowering the emissions?
Yeah, well, as I said, this is government-enabled, but it's private sector-led. So our first job really was, because it's the core of the Act is built around tax incentives to do the right thing, to do good things, to go clean. Mm-hmm. And it did something that's really quite unusual in Washington. It gave 10 years of certainty to that investment horizon. We've had support for clean energy in the past, particularly for clean power, but it was like on-off, yes. Annual cycle. Now we've got 10 years of certainty so people can project and decide to make investments in big projects. And we've seen that happening really all across the country. There's been, since President Biden came into office, about $500 billion of investment in manufacturing. About half of that is in the clean tech sector. About half of that has been just since the IRA passed. Mm-hmm. And as I noted, we're seeing investments occur in Georgia and Alabama, in Michigan and Ohio, and upstate in New York, in Nevada and California. People are excited about the opportunity to build things where I'd say maybe the greatest amount of the action has been taking the incentives to really move forward with the electrification of transportation. So you see the big auto companies making commitments to moving towards away from internal combustion engines and towards electrified vehicles. That's with the support of another bill that the president passed, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is deploying 500,000 chargers across the country, or more than 100,000 fast chargers. We've been working with the people again in the private sector. We're sorting out so that it's easy and available, but you can go from sea to shining sea in an electric vehicle, and with the certainty that you can find charging available. And we've seen, as a result, the spike of electric vehicle sales in the United States happen under the president's watch. So more than tripled. With what we're trying to reach is 50% new car sales by 2030 being electric vehicles.
Yes.
And again, the Detroit 3 are making massive investments both in production and in producing the supply chains for battery production itself. But you're also seeing a lot of now foreign direct investment. The Korean auto companies are making big investments in Georgia and other places. So we need to get on with this project, and I think we're feeling pretty good that the combination of the financial incentives plus smart regulation that's coming from the EPA can get us to the 50% mark that you mentioned.
It's working, yes. What have been the main challenges that you have found in implementing IRA?
Yeah, that's a great question. I describe my job as a lot of blocking and tackling. So I think there are three big ones. One is permitting. We can get into that. We got good at stopping things. We need to get good at building things in the country. And so this has been something the administration's focused on at the highest levels of government, including the president. And the White House has organized itself with the cabinet to try to make progress on permitting. That's particularly a huge need in terms of transmission and interconnection of clean energy resources onto the grid. So that's one big challenge.
And I would like to go deep in that, because when we talk about building new clean energy projects, new clean energy infrastructure, it takes an average of 5 years for the companies and the developers to get the necessary permits and necessary approvals, or longer. The White House has said that they will support a bill that was recently introduced by Senator Joe Manchin that will basically speed up the energy projects. The bill has bipartisan support. What are your thoughts, and what are the pros and cons of that proposal?
Well, we just had action on that, and as part of as some of the elements of that bill as part of the debt limit deal that the president negotiated with Speaker McCarthy. And we got a start on what we think is necessary. That consolidated, we set some strong time limits on how long it should take to do an environmental impact statement or environmental assessment. We combined and strengthened the ability to look at an overall program rather than project by project. More use of and a better process for getting input at the front end from communities that are affected, which is really important to let people, if there are problems, work them out at the beginning. Don't work them out in litigation after the permits have been let. If I could, I'll tell you one story, Vanessa. When I came back to the White House, I had a similar role for President Obama, and I thought I had resolved a high-performance transmission project to bring renewable resources from the Southwest to the big markets in Phoenix and Los Angeles. When I was working for President Obama, I came back right after Labor Day. President, after the bill passed, asked me to come back. I come back. First week, I'm back over at the Energy Department. I sat down with Secretary Granholm, and we're going to go over the transmission projects that need to be, that where permit needs to be sped up. First project, the project I thought I had resolved in 2014.
Yes.
It's nearly 10 years later, and it's still on the board.
Are you
Now,
talking about
we just-
the 10 West Link?
We just finished the federal process for doing that. It's a project called Sunzia that begins in New Mexico, and 10 West just broke ground, which is going from bringing renewable resources from Wyoming across into Nevada and then eventually to California. So, I mean, we're making progress, but this is hard, and it takes the attention of the most senior levels of government. Mm-hmm. And that, I've worked in 3 White Houses. I've never seen that before, where cabinet secretaries are going project by project and saying, what's the problem? Why can't we fix it? How do we speed it up? But that's what it's going to take, because we need to, for example, just on the transmission front, we need to increase high-performance transmission, interstate transmission in this country by 60% in the next 7 years. It was taking 10, 12, 14 years to permit a transmission project. We have got to cut that time. We got to do it smart. You can do that through these programmatic reviews, through creating transmission corridors where developers know where they can go, where they're more likely to get the permits that they need. It's not fancy. It's just time on task, putting enough people on it.
Yes.
The IRA gave us $1 billion to put just people on the permitting process, and we're doing that.
So many environmentalists and clean energy leaders say that permitting reform is absolutely necessary in order for the implementation of many of the projects of IRA. Do you agree? That
Yeah, and I think we need more, and we're hoping that we get more bipartisan support. As I mentioned, we got a down payment, if you will, in the debt limit bill, which will help and will speed things up to deploy more clean energy. But we really need some focused support on transmission, on interconnection, and quite frankly, on community engagement. That was one of the things we asked for. We didn't get in this authority, which was to give the communities the resources they need to participate early, whether that's communities that have often borne the brunt of pollution from industrial and power sector sources, or tribal communities, et cetera. I was just out in the Pacific Northwest working with the 4 Columbia Treaty Tribes in the Northwest about how we build more clean power to service those tribes. I mean, we got to get that. The only way this is going to work is to have more engagement at the front end, as I noted, and listen to people. If there's a problem, often you can resolve it if you get in at the front end. You can mitigate, you can work around sensitive sites, but you have to do that at the front end. If you wait to the back end, you just end up in court, and it just can take forever.
Makes the process longer. At the same time, if it's going to speed up the process for the clean energy projects, it will also speed up the process for the fossil fuel industry projects. So how detrimental will be that for achieving our climate goals?
Well, look, I think we have been clear that we see the transition to clean, renewable resources as fundamental. And I think that that's not going to happen tomorrow. There's going to be a transition. We're going to continue to utilize fossil fuels, both oil and gas, in the foreseeable future. We ought to do that with the highest environmental standards. We're working hard to eliminate methane emissions from oil and gas development, but we need to do that in a smart way. And quite frankly, the oil and gas industry has a role to play, I think. They have a lot of engineering expertise. They have a lot of capital, et cetera, in certain technologies like green hydrogen, other technologies on carbon management that I think they're looking at the future and saying, okay, we're moving towards a world where energy is being where the emissions are going down, where we're decarbonizing the energy system, what's our role to play? And, we fight with them a lot. We think, sometimes they spend more money on stock buybacks than on good investments, and we point that out when it's when it's necessary, and they fight with us when they think we're doing something wrong. But I think it's critical that we make this transition in a practical way, but there's no denying the damage that climate change is doing today. It's not in the future. You can go to Chicago today and see the smoke from those Canadian fires. You could look at the massive fires that were here in Colorado in December of 21, and you can, whether it's hurricanes, droughts, floods, sea level rise, we have got to come to grips with the fact that we need to, there's one way and only one path forward, and that's to decarbonize the energy system.
You have said it very right. The International Energy Agency has said that no new fossil fuel infrastructure can be built if our planet wants to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. But according to the Department of Land Management, this administration approved 6,787 drilling leases in the first 25 months. So that is 100 more than the previous administration. So how can you reconcile the message that you just gave us with these numbers?
Look, I think, as I said, we need to be doing what we can, but within the bounds of the law, and B, in a way that's practical and that the transition happens. One of the things that occurred that I think, again, was unexpected but demonstrates the vulnerability that the world economy has to dependence on fossil fuels, was Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, which threw markets into turmoil. I think that the United States stepped up and tried to become a reliable supplier of gas to Europe at a time of great need there, particularly during the first winter. And they've responded quite substantially to both reduce their demand, but also to change their sources of supply. They were way over dependent on Russia. We needed to respond to that. I think that we did that in a responsible way. When it comes to leasing properties, we're to some extent constrained by the law in terms of giving permits to valid leases that were given by previous administrations. And we're trying to do that in a smart and sensible way, and one, as I said, that puts a responsibility on those developers to reduce emissions, to produce fuels in a cleaner way. But it's not, it's a challenging, it's certainly challenging from a messaging perspective, as you noted, and it's challenging to get the balance right. We think that the combination of electrification of transportation and efficiency in buildings, shifting the power sector towards renewable and zero carbon resources. I see my friend Bill Budding in the front row. We were talking about small modular nuclear reactors. That's a technology that's coming online. There's interest in that. TVA is, I've just been in conversations with them about their deployment strategy. But getting zero carbon into the electricity system, electrifying as much as we can, getting more efficiency in both the built sector, tackling industrial processes, building out green hydrogen. That's what we need to do, and we've got 27 years to do it till we need to get to net zero. That's an audacious challenge, but I think it's one we can meet. But in the meantime, we've got to balance that with keeping the economy running, and so there, we're trying to make smart decisions in that regard.
So I know that, without a doubt, this administration have made an enormous commitment, unprecedented commitment to clean energy and to protecting our planet against climate change. But I have to ask you about the Willow Project. President Biden promised when he was campaigning that he was not going to give new leases in federal lands. And the WILL project was approved a couple of months ago, and as you know, it will release 9.2 million metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year for 30 years. So after that approval came through, I remember I read an article in the New York Times that talked about the impact that that had in the younger generations, the young people that actually voted for this administration, believing that they were really committed and believing in those campaign promises. So what would be your message to them?
I think the overall message is we're on. We have. It's a well. Let me talk about Willow first, and then I'll come to that. We didn't let the leases for Willow. The leases had been let 20 years ago, and the company had valid leases to develop the property. We considered there was an environmental impact statement that about whether to permit the project and go forward with it. We thought that the company had valid right to develop the project, and that we were quite vulnerable to litigation and to paying huge penalties if we had stopped the project. We thought the better strategy there, working with ConocoPhillips, was to reduce the footprint of the project. It was reduced by more than 40%, protect 12 million acres in the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska, and withdraw the rest of the Arctic Ocean. President Obama had withdrawn a considerable amount of it, but we withdrew the remainder of the Arctic Ocean from further leasing and drilling. That was a path that balanced their legal rights with the need to kind of shrink the project. But to put the project in perspective, and you accurately stated what the emission profile is. And even if you assume that none of that is substituted, like that's all additionality, if you will, and oil from other places wouldn't have been substituted for that production. That's less than 1% of the annual emission reductions from the IRA. So I think what we need to do is make sure that people know that there is a strategy to tackle climate change, to stay on track with our primary promise, which is to cut emissions by 50%, to invest in clean technology. By the way, to put young people to work doing that work. The Department of Energy just today, Secretary Granholm released a report that said clean energy overall, and clean energy in particular, was one of the fastest growing job segments in the overall economy, more than 300,000 jobs created last year. Overwhelming numbers of young people going into that work. Mm-hmm. There's opportunities for service in that space. And I think I think the president is committed to demonstrating his commitment to both preserving nature, to conserving resources where we can, to being smart about how we utilize our natural resources to deal with making investments in resilience and sustainability. But the overall project is one in which there's no one who's been more committed to tackling climate change than President Biden, and I think we got a good story to tell on that.
That's undeniable, Mr. Podesta. The scientific community have been very clear. I mean, we have 30 years to make this, 27 years to make this transition, and these next 10 years, this decade, is going to be critical. Do you think that we're moving fast enough?
I think I think you got to look at that from a national perspective and from the global perspective. I think, and remember, the previous administration pulled us out of Paris, did everything it could to undermine investment in critical technologies, tried to zero out the science budgets that were based on trying to tackle climate change. So and had a dramatic impact on the scientific workforce in the federal government that we're trying to rebuild. So we started in a place where we needed to reestablish the seriousness of purpose and the leadership of the United States globally. And I think the president did that by making this, again, a center of his economic strategy, by making a commitment, which we refer to as Justice 40, that 40% of the benefits would go to communities that have been disadvantaged and borne the brunt of pollution. That's across the board, not just through the IRA and bipartisan infrastructure law investments. And setting that target that we think we can meet, which is that 50% reduction target by 2030. And I think we're on track to do that. It's not just coming from those investments, although we get about to 40% just with the passage of the IRA, maybe a little bit more. But it's going to take the full weight of the government, whether that's on using the government as its resources to procure and be a sort of a leader in the movement, whether that's buildings or transportation, et cetera, or the authorities we have under the Clean Air Act. We've set aggressive standards to decarbonize the power sector that EPA just recently released that will get us on track, reduce emissions by 646 million metric tons. We set very strong standards for tailpipe emissions for both autos and light-duty trucks, but also for heavier vehicles. We're deploying and using the resources in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA to ensure that cities and community groups take advantage of the investments that are in the bill so that they can begin, particularly those communities, those mayors, those governors that want to lead the charge, have the resources to be able to make the kinds of investments, whether that's putting rooftop solar on every school in a city, which some cities have pledged to do, or retrofitting their buildings, or decarbonizing their transportation fleets in those cities. We're seeing massive investment across the board. We have very good partners. And by the way, in Washington, this is a really partisan issue. When you go out into the country, yes, there's more support, I think. I've had very good conversations with Republican governors who, let me tell you, they're anxious to get these investments.
Yes.
You know,
or mayors at the local level, they have
exactly.
done a terrific job.
You know, I mean, the more it gets into the kind of partisan Washington space, the more difficult the conversation is. But yeah, I talked just to give an example. I talked to Governor Stitt of Oklahoma the other day, a couple of weeks, maybe a month ago, and he was very happy to get the new Enel, the Italian renewable company's investment in solar manufacturing in Oklahoma. His question to me was, why did I lose the Volkswagen factory to Canada? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think when you look at it from that perspective of where people want job creation to happen, where sustainability can happen, where investment can happen, then I think, and even if you just look at public opinion, there's strong support, more than majority support, across the political spectrum for these kind of investments.
Definitely. And in the past couple of years, I mean, the previous administration, obviously, it was at the local level that these leaders, governors and mayors actually took the lead to move us forward to the sustainable future that we want. But how important, I know that you work in the domestic policy, but how important it is at the international arena that now the United States is actually leading by example?
Well, look, I think it's critical. Mm-hmm. I think there have been complaints coming from our international trading partners about the fact that one of the things we make no apologies for is we want to see industries built in the United States. We want to put people back to work. We've had a manufacturing renaissance here. I mentioned Steve's presentation, just a spike in manufacturing investment in the United States after really 2 decades of flatlining. We don't apologize for that. We encourage them to do the same thing. And if you look at our partners in Europe, in Asia, in India, I just was with the president in his bilateral meetings with Prime Minister Modi. I think this is happening across the globe. Now, there are complaints about the particular way that we've constructed that. We're trying to work through that in partnership. But I just say, 2 things, Vanessa. One is we got overly dependent on China for a source of supply for critical technologies in the clean tech space, particularly in clean batteries and upstream in the solar technology space. We need to reshore those, and we've seen a lot of advancement in that. Those numbers I quoted are in those areas, and we need to find partnership with our friends and allies to make sure that those supply chains are reliable and from friendly sources for critical minerals, for ingots and wafers in the solar space, et cetera. So we're working together. But I think one of the other things it's worth pointing out is another critical leadership role that the U.S. has is innovation. Yes. We're putting a lot of money in the labs. The private sector investments driving costs down. BCG estimated that the investments from the IRA will drop the global cost of clean energy by 25%. So no matter where you are in the world, whether you're in India or Africa, that cost reduction is vital to your ability to deploy using strategies to build your economy, create growth, and do it in a sustainable way. And I think that's a huge global public good.
Wonderful. Yes, definitely. I wanted to ask you one more question about IRA. During the Trump administration, the EPA reversed almost 100 environmental laws. And of course, he put in charge of the EPA Andrew Wheeler and Scott Pruitt. There were people that were not really looking for the best interests of the mission of the agency.
That would be slightly understated.
I know. So at least 100 environmental laws that were meant to protect human health and the environment were reversed or revoked. So in the case that we will have another Trump administration, how do you make sure that the advances that you have made with IRA and with the Infrastructure Act are not reversed?
Well, that's a frightening thought, but
yes.
let me try to answer a kind of future Republican administration that doesn't have the same commitment, whenever that occurs. I think one of the things that's exciting about the structure of the Inflation Reduction Act is it's got deep roots. Though that 10 years of predictability that I mentioned, the investment that's happening right now, the jobs that are being created, the facilities that are being stood up, the deployment of clean energy, the steel in the ground has, with the expectation, I said certainty, but certainly with the expectation that support through policy is going to be there, changes the political equation. I was around in 2009, 2010 when Waxman-Markey was being debated, the cap and trade legislation. And I sometimes describe, people ask me what's changed between now and then. I said, then we were just talking about what did we need to shut down. Now we're talking about what do we need to build. Mm-hmm. That's a different conversation. And I think it's a more rooted conversation, again, in red states and blue states and communities across the country, very hard to uproot. And I think that if you look at both the combination of investments being made and private sector pledges being made to their constituencies, to their consumers, to their shareholders about the trajectories that they're on, I think this policy is here to stay. And there's elections have consequence. I don't want to. I don't want to. I've been doing this for too long, but elections have consequence. So who you put in charge of those critical agencies? I have the honor and the pleasure of working with committed public servants across the board. I mentioned, Secretary Granholm. Michael Regan is in Vermont today announcing with Senator Sanders a $7 billion program to put rooftop solar and community solar in low and moderate income communities across the country. Secretary Raimondo, who's really in charge of building out the Chips and Science Act. Secretary Yellen, who's been critical in making sure we stay on track and on time. The commitment of people and the seriousness of leadership and the mission matters, and elections have consequences. And so I'm proud of the president. I'm proud of the president, the vice president, but I'm proud of the team. And so it'll have consequence. But I think the policy, we went through, to draw an analogy, we went through this in the repeated efforts to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But in the end of the day, the Affordable Care Act stood the test of time. And I think these policies will stand the test of that time.
Wonderful to hear. Well, before being named the senior advisor to the president for clean energy and innovation, you serve as a top climate advisor to President Obama, and you also work in the passing of the Paris Climate Agreement. Why is this issue personally important for you?
I think it's like, in some sense, it is what is going to define the economy and the security of the human race going forward in our country, across the planet. It is, in my mind, the most important issue that we're facing as a planet and as a species. So why not work on what's the most important thing? I sort of got into it. I was kind of the green chief of staff when I was President Clinton's chief of staff. Worked with.
So it was always something that you had inside.
Yeah, it was always something that I deeply cared about, and it's an extremely challenging, complicated, almost Rubik's cube. But the IPCC in 2018, when they did a report that's referred to as the 1.5 report, they were asked in Paris, the international body of scientists, tell us the difference between what a world where global average temperatures rise 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial level and what a world where 2 degrees of global warming take place. Because that was actually what we were trying to hit, 2 degrees C. That was the argument of what we needed to do. And they came back in 2018 with a stark analysis of the impact on the natural world from the difference with in the oceans, with species loss, etc. The difference between what a 1.5 world looked like and what a 2 degree world looked like. That reoriented the whole conversation. So no longer were people talking about 80% reductions. In order to stabilize the atmosphere, you had to get to net zero. Not 100% reductions, but net zero. We're taking as much carbon out of the atmosphere as we're putting into it. They also said in that report that will take a change in the global economy a revolution in the global economy on the size and scale that's never occurred in human history. So think about that. What's more interesting to work on? I mean, I know there's probably a lot more sessions on AI right now, and AI probably has a place in trying to solve this challenge. But what is more interesting than working on a transformation of the global economy on a size and scale that's never occurred in human history, and that has to happen in 27 years.
And I have to say, in the personal level, I think it's fascinating that for me, that we're living in these times, because it never happened before at this scale, this transformation that we're going through. So we'll need to change many things, pretty much everything, the way that we move, the way that we travel, the way that we eat, the way that we dress. Is going to be a huge undertaking. And we will need from everybody, not only state actors, but also companies and of course, the civil societies. It's so important that we all get on board. It's been a privilege to talk to you, yeah. Mr. Podesta. And I wanted to leave a couple of minutes for questions for the audience. So
you have to start calling me John, though.
Okay, so we have one here.
Sorry.
Next you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Joan Michelson, Electric Ladies podcast. So there's this is a very corporate audience as well, and you know this audience better than just about anybody. There's an interesting juxtaposition with the corporate sector, because on one hand, there's an incentive with all the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act and the other legislation, but there's been 15,000 comments and lots of pushback to the SEC climate risk disclosure rules, and so you kind of have a little bit of push and pull here on the corporate sector. So talk about the impact that the response you're getting from the corporate sector on these initiatives and how you're managing that push and pull. And also, if you can talk about, I was in the Grumpy session too, you might have heard my question about why isn't the public really understanding the impact of this legislation and how well the economy is doing as well.
Well,
thank you.
That was. I'll start with the former, which is and obviously the SEC rules, independent process, is being managed by the chairman, Gary Gensler, et cetera. The White House has an attitude about climate risk, particularly financial risk. Monica Medina came to this session as well, and I were in the back saying, Steve needs to upgrade his charts and talk a little bit more about the financial risk embedded in what we're seeing happen. Again, I won't go through the litany, but what we're seeing happen right now, which is going to accelerate in terms of business risk that's coming from extreme weather, climate change, disruption of food, water systems, et cetera. Just so that people have an understanding of that's a real issue with respect to financial risk. And I'm hoping that the SEC will land a solid rule, because I think investors are, in fact, quite interested in seeing how corporate leadership is tackling what they see as future risk for their investment. And so I'll get over my skis if I say what I think he should do, and it's his job to do it, and it's an independent agency. But I think we need, just as Europe has done, we need to move forward with informing investors about how climate risk is really going to affect the bottom line. With respect to the public, there's certainly a lag time. I mentioned the ACA. You certainly felt that with the Affordable Care Act. And there's certainly a lag time between when things pass, when things get deployed, when people feel them. And but it's our job to go out and communicate that. And for the people who want to see a different future in this country and want to see this transition and tackling climate change, to help us tell the story of what's really going on. There's nothing, I think you can, I'm spewing off national statistics, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing like localizing this. and getting really down to the narrative of local stories of people going to work, doing the right thing, building the right kinds of projects, that's going to, ultimately convince people. And so the president is in Chicago today and making an argument for why an investment-led strategy that is built around the ideas of public investment combined with worker education and mobilization and more competition in the economy is going to produce stronger growth. And we've seen tremendous economic success, 13 million jobs in 2 years, U.S. economy outperforming the rest of the world in terms of post-COVID recovery. And again, I'll quote Steve again. Why? Because we had a different policy change. We made the right sort of investments, and we can, fight about some of the details of that. But the idea that we were going to tackle the post-COVID recession with public investment, putting people to work, creating a stability, and transforming the energy system, I think has proven to be a good call, and one that we'll obviously spend the next 15 months talking to the American people about, or how many ever, about 16 months, I guess.
Quick question. You spoke about it briefly before, but when you look at the advances in technology, reliability of nuclear last time, right, the technology in our country was 60 years old, right, from now. Do you think when you juxtapose that against the permitting challenges, do you think new nuclear kind of technologies will have a place in decarbonizing?
I do. I think both globally, but particularly at the small modular level, the United States probably with a leadership position there, more likely to be developed here and regulatory regimes to be developed here that make the certainty of deployment around the rest of the world more likely. I think it's probably still 8 years away. And I was describing the conversation we had this morning. There's probably some ways in which we need and can, in fact, speed that up. But I think these technologies are promising. They're safe, and the waste management issues are being built in at the front end, rather than waiting to do what we did in the first massive investment, which sort of ended with 3 Mile Island. So I've worked a lot on this issue over the years. It's really a question, I think, of economics. Is this a cost proposition that is going to make sense for baseload power compared to the cost reduction curves on renewable resources plus storage? And I think the need for baseload is strong. We're working with TVA, which is kind of maybe at the front of the line on deployment. Maybe not quite at the front of the line, but they're pretty, they're serious about deploying 4 modular reactors in the next decade. We just need to make sure that the public is satisfied that the safety is there. The technology is quite promising. There are different designs. We'll see who emerges as, and there's global interest. But they're kind of looking to the United States to go first in a way.
Yeah, you have to avoid the not in my backyard, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead here, sir.
John, the global overheating of the world, we can address this in the United States, probably with our European friends, but I worry very much. We don't seem to have, China's building coal plants as we talk, India's building coal and plants and oil, refineries as we talk. If the rest of the world isn't brought into this same thought process, is it going to make any difference about our being able to get 2% or below?
Look, that's the biggest question that that sort of exists out there. But just to be clear, the renewable goals that India set forward are huge and substantial, but they had 600 million people who lacked access to electricity. So the question is, what's the pace of clean, and how do you begin to retire dirty? I think the Chinese picture is cloudy and clouded. I think they, back when I was working with Obama, I think their commitments and plans for their renewable built out, which they accomplished, and certainly they've taken the lead in terms of electric vehicles, were very substantial, but they've continued to build out and rely way too much on coal for both industrial and power sector needs, and that has got to end. And so it's not the United States that, or, you know, whether we talk again, and I admire Secretary Kerry's commitment to keep going back, and Secretary Blinken was just there and saw President Xi. The rest of the world has to put pressure on the Chinese to begin to change course, to retire earlier. They're probably peaking in their emissions probably in the next year or two, but they have to go further faster, or we're just not going to solve the problem. And the same thing is probably true of India, but the development challenge there is a little bit different. And I think the United States has a role to play in partnering with places like India. The USAID is working with, for example, the India. You know, India has a very elaborate rail system to electrify their rail system. The United States has a role to play in creating strong partnerships. And I know that when Secretary Jewell was in office, she spent a lot of time on this problem. So, I said.
Okay. Do we have time for more questions, or when? Okay. So you here?
I'll stay around too if you want.
I know that you have a plane to catch. No, Mr. Podesta, here?
I got a couple minutes.
It's okay.
Ladies first. John, I want to ask a question whether this massive federal investment going to help or hurt economic equity. Since the pandemic started, the racial wealth gap has increased by 70%. And SBA released for the first time federal procurement data by race by ethnicity. Black businesses only received 1.67% of $559 billion federal spend eligible for small businesses. So I'm concerned.
Look, let me answer that directly. I think we should be concerned about that. I think what the IRA in particular, the Inflation Reduction Act, was revolutionary in is trying to enhance the ability to ensure that those investments went to communities that have often been left out. The way that worked was to provide significant adders to the investment and production tax credits, to cite those investments in low-income communities, disadvantaged communities, traditional energy communities, and to pay a 5x bonus on the credit for paying prevailing wage and using certified apprentices, so that the jobs would be good jobs. The investment would go to communities in rural America, in places, again, that borne the brunt of pollution. So I think the structure of the law was different than where those ideas, equations really were not thought about as much in past efforts. So I'm optimistic that we can see that happen. And I mentioned the program that Michael Regan has announced today in Vermont, which is directly aimed at distributing both training workers in those communities and installing and providing the benefits of clean technology in low-income neighborhoods and moderate-income neighborhoods through both rooftop and community solar. That's the kind of thing we should be doing.
Great. One last question, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Greg Hamra, also from Miami. Citizens Climate Lobby. 2 weeks ago, yesterday, we had 900 people on Capitol Hill lobbying for volunteer lobbyists, by the way, citizens like you and me, lobbying for a number of policies that you actually mentioned, Mr. Podesta, which is building electrification and efficiency, permitting reform, very important. And one thing that you didn't really talk about, but actually is a perfect follow-up to this gentleman's question, the what about China question, which is a very important question. If the U.S. is 11% of global emissions, it almost doesn't matter what we do. And Vanessa keeps harping on this all the time, every time I see her, and it makes total sense. Could you please speak about another, to the audience here, another policy called the carbon border adjustment and how important that is to allow pricing in one country to cross borders, something regulations do not do, prices do cross borders. And so this would accelerate the drawdown of dirty and accelerate clean.
Right.
Thank you.
And we, in general terms, we've supported that idea. Let me get specific, though. And I want to reject the premise, though, that you started with, which is it doesn't matter what the U.S. does. It matters a lot what the U.S. does. If the U.S. is on its back heels, then the rest of the world's not going anywhere. If the U.S. is in a leadership position, if they're driving change, then, and particularly working with our allies and partners, we've reordered the world economy, then other people are going to come along as well. And so it matters a lot what we do here. And I think that idea that, well, you know, China is going to do what it's going to do. China is not going to do what it's going to do if we do the right thing. They only get off the hook when we're not out there. So that's number one. Secondly, on the carbon border adjustment, we're in consultation, trying to work out an arrangement on aluminum and steel with European allies with a emissions-based standard, which hopefully will resolve sometime this fall, which gives the basis of, or it's kind of an underpinning of what a carbon border adjustment could look like. Europeans are further ahead. They're committed to, in essence, it's not, I would not call it protectionism. They're committed to not permitting free ridership against their own internal sources of supply by saying if we're going to put a burden of decarbonization on our companies, then people who are importing into our zone have the same responsibility. I think that's an idea the United States should take up. And I think we need to harmonize. One of the things that's a little bit tricky between the U.S. and Europe is they essentially have a price-based emission system. We have a standards-based emission system. So it's not easy to technically blend those systems. But I think the decarbonization goal is what we need to get to. And I think, again, we need to ensure that there's a level playing field for our producers in that context. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Podesta, for your leadership and for everything that you do. Thank you so much.